Have you ever had someone take something from you, not by force, not by law, but by money and patience and the quiet assumption that everyone, eventually, has a price? That's where Tatum Hale's story begins. Not with a courtroom, not with a fight, with a knock on the door and a man in a fleece vest holding a business card she didn't ask for. Tatum was 29 years old when the first offer came in. She'd been running Hale's Hollow, her family's lavender farm in the valley outside Elkhorn, Colorado, for just under 3 years at that point. She'd taken it over after her father's stroke left him unable to walk the rows himself, and she'd done it the only way she knew how, stubbornly, quietly, one season at a time. The farm sat on 40 acres of sloped terrain that her grandfather had cleared by hand in the 1960s. The soil was rocky, and the winters came hard and early. But Lavender didn't mind. It liked the cold. It liked the struggle. Tatum always thought that was fitting. By the time she took the reins, the farm had a small distillery for essential oils, a handful of loyal wholesale clients, and a roadside stand that did decent business from June through August. It wasn't a gold mine, but it was hers. And it had been her family's for 60 years, and that meant something she couldn't quite put into dollars. The man at the door that first afternoon was Mr. Covington. He worked for a development group out of Denver called Summit Meridian. They had, he explained cheerfully, recently acquired the 300-acre parcel directly above Tatum's property, the old Brecker grazing land that had sat fallow for a decade. Summit Meridian had plans for it, big plans. A 4-season resort, Mr. Covington said, standing on her porch like he'd already decided how the meeting would end. Winter skiing, summer hiking, boutique lodges, spa facilities. We expect to be fully operational within 36 months. Tatum looked at him, then she looked past him, up the hillside where the scrub oak was turning copper in the September light. "That's wonderful for you," she said. "Is there something I can help you with?" Mr. Covington smiled the way men like him always smiled. Patient, practiced, certain. He explained that Summit Meridian was extending a courtesy offer to adjacent landowners before construction began. They were prepared to be generous. She'd be set for life. Her father would be comfortable. She could do anything she wanted. "I'm already doing what I want," Tatum said, and she closed the door. "Now, let me be clear about something." Tatum wasn't naive. She knew what was coming. She'd grown up watching small farms get absorbed by bigger operations, watched neighboring families sell their land in ones and twos until the valley started to look like a different place entirely. She understood that saying no once didn't mean the question went away. Men like Mr. Covington didn't take a closed door personally. They just scheduled a follow-up. But knowing something is coming and being prepared for it are two different things. Construction on what would become Ridgeline Peak Resort began the following spring. Tatum watched it from her kitchen window every morning. Machinery grinding up the hillside, steel frames rising against the sky, the sound of blasting that rattled the windows twice in April and woke her at 5 in the morning with a sound like the mountain clearing its throat. The dust was the first real problem. It came down off the construction site in sheets on windy days, settling on the lavender rows like gray powder. She washed the plants when she could. She lost a section of the north field that first summer, not all of it, but enough to matter. Mr. Covington came back in May with a new offer, higher than the first. In August, he brought Mr. Ashby, who was apparently above Mr. Covington in some organizational sense, and spoke more slowly, as if that made the numbers sound more reasonable. In October, a woman named Ms. Farrell arrived with a folder full of glossy projections and the phrase long-term synergy repeated at regular intervals. Each time Tatum listened. Each time she said no. Her father, watching from his recliner by the window, Would ask afterward what they'd offered. She'd tell him. He'd let out a long breath. "You know your own mind," he'd say. It was the closest he ever came to questioning her. "I know my own land," she'd answer, and that would be the end of it. Here's the thing about a resort going up on the ridge above your property that nobody tells you until it happens. The light changes. That sounds small. It isn't. By the time the main lodge structure was complete, a sprawling complex of timber and stone that crouched along the ridgeline like something trying to look natural. The afternoon shadow it cast reached the lower lavender rows by 3 o'clock in summer. Lavender needs sun. It's not optional. The plants in the shadow zone grew slower, bloomed thinner, produced less oil. She adapted. She planted the shadow rows with shade-tolerant herbs, lemon balm, spearmint, a little patch of chamomile, and rerouted her harvest schedule to concentrate on the upper fields. She didn't like it, but she did it. What she couldn't adapt around was the access road. Summit Meridian's primary construction route ran along the eastern edge of Tatum's property, separated by a fence line that existed on the county map and almost nowhere else. Twice in that second summer, supply trucks drifted onto her land. Once, a bulldozer took out 40 feet of her irrigation line before the operator noticed. The repair cost her $3,000, and a week she didn't have. She filed a complaint with the county. She hired an attorney, Mr. Delacroix, who worked out of Glenwood Springs and wore the same corduroy jacket every time she saw him, which gave her a strange sense of comfort. He sent letters. Summit Meridian's legal team responded with letters of their own, longer and full of terms she had to look up. It was slow and expensive, and the irrigation line didn't care about any of it. Meanwhile, Ridgeline Peak opened in December. The grand opening was covered by 3 regional news outlets and a lifestyle website that described the resort as a sanctuary above the clouds. There were photos of the gondola, the stone fireplaces, the restaurant with its wall of west-facing windows. There were no photos of the Lavender farm 40 feet below the property line. Tatum saw the coverage on her phone while she was checking the freeze damage on the south field at 7 in the morning. Her boots soaked through from the overnight frost. She put the phone back in her pocket and kept walking. The first winter, the resort did well. Skiers came up from Denver and Colorado Springs. The lodges filled on weekends. The restaurant got a write-up that used the word elevated 4 times in 2 paragraphs. Tatum survived the winter selling oil through her wholesale contracts and a small online shop she'd built herself the previous fall. Lavender sachets, balms, small amber bottles of oil that she packed and shipped from her kitchen table after dinner. It wasn't enough. It was almost enough. That's its own specific kind of hard. Spring came. The snowmelt ran down the hillside the way it always had, only now it ran through the disturbed earth of the construction site, picking up sediment, coming down darker and faster than before. It braided through the lower lavender rows in runnels that hadn't existed before the resort. She built berms. She rerouted. She planted more chamomile. Mr. Covington came back in April. This time he didn't bring an offer. He brought something that felt more like concern, which was worse. He said the resort had been monitoring the situation. He said they were interested in a cooperative arrangement. He said the word partnership twice without explaining what he meant by it. Tatum offered him coffee, which surprised him. She listened to everything he said, then she asked one question. Would Summit Meridian be willing to restore the irrigation infrastructure they damaged in writing as a starting condition? He said that would need to go through legal. She thanked him for the coffee and walked him to his truck. Let me tell you about the afternoon that changed things, because it didn't look like much when it happened. It was a Saturday in late June. The second summer after the resort opened, Tatum was in the distillery running a small batch of oil when she heard the crunch of gravel outside. She went to the door expecting a delivery truck. Instead, there was a couple standing in her driveway. He was in ski resort lagerwear, still wearing a lanyard from the gondola. She had mud on her boots and the slightly dazed look of someone who just walked farther than she meant to. "Is this a farm?" the woman asked. Her name, Tatum learned later, was Claire. "We saw it from the trail," we thought. "We weren't sure if it was open." "It's a farm," Tatum said. "Lavender. Can we look around?" Tatum almost said no. She was in the middle of a batch. The distillery was running. She had 3 more hours of work ahead of her, but something in the woman's face stopped her. A genuine, uncomplicated curiosity that had nothing to do with leverage or negotiation or long-term synergy. She just wanted to see the lavender. "Give me 10 minutes, Tatum said. She walked them through the upper rows. She explained how the plants grew, how the oil was extracted, what the different varieties were. The man, Tom, he said, from Boulder, crouched down next to a plant and rubbed a stem between his fingers and held it to his nose with the expression of someone who'd just been handed something they didn't know they were missing. "This is the most real thing I've encountered all weekend," he said. He wasn't being ironic. He was just telling the truth. They bought 2 bottles of oil and a sachets bundle. They asked if she ever did tours. "Not officially," Tatum said. "You should," Claire said. "Seriously, half the people up at that resort are looking for something to do that isn't skiing. There's only so many times you can ride the gondola." After they left, Tatum stood in the driveway for a long time. She looked up at the ridgeline. The lodge sat there the way it always did, massive, gleaming, pulling the light off the mountain. Then she looked at the rows of lavender running down the slope, pale purple in the afternoon sun, moving slightly in the wind that came down off the high country. Not everyone skis, but most people, if you put them in a field of lavender in the Colorado mountains on a June afternoon, will feel something open in them they forgot they had. She started offering tours 2 weeks later. It was modest at first. A hand-lettered sign at the end of the driveway, a post on the local tourism board's website, a mention in a Glenwood Springs visitor's newsletter. She charged $30 a person for a 1-hour walkthrough, oil distillation demonstration included. She added a small shop table near the barn with products she hadn't bothered selling in person before. Fresh, cut bundles, candles she'd been making for herself all winter, a lip balm recipe her mother had used that she'd never thought to bottle until now. The first 3 weekends, she had maybe 8 people total. Then a woman from Denver wrote about the farm on a travel blog she kept, a small blog, nothing major. The post was titled, "The Most Peaceful Hour I've Had in 3 Years," and it included a photo of Tatum in the distillery holding up a copper flask with lavender rose visible through the window behind her. The post got shared. Then it got shared again. By the 3rd week of July, Tatum was booked out on weekends. By August, she'd added a Wednesday afternoon session. She hired a local high school girl named Poppy to help with the shop table, and her father, who was having a better stretch physically, started appearing on the porch in his good flannel shirt around tour time, which the visitors seemed to love almost as much as the lavender. Meanwhile, something was happening up at Ridgeline Peak that nobody from Summit Meridian mentioned to Tatum directly, but that she heard about from enough guests to piece together. People were leaving the resort to come to her farm, not just wandering down by accident the way Claire and Tom had, deliberately searching for the lavender farm online before they left home, asking at the resort's front desk for directions. One family, a couple with 2 young kids, and a grandmother who moved slowly and held the children's hands, told Tatum they'd specifically booked the resort because of a comment someone had left on a hiking forum. Great trails, But don't miss the Lavender farm at the bottom of the hill. The resort had a spa with a full-price massage menu. They had an outdoor fire pit experience that cost $90 per person. They had a farm-to-table restaurant where none of the ingredients were from anywhere near a farm, and certainly not from the one sitting directly below them, and the deck of the main lodge. And their guests were leaving to spend an afternoon with a 29-year-old woman and her Lavender. I imagine the conversations that must have happened in Summit Meridian's Denver offices that fall. I imagine spreadsheets being pulled up, guest satisfaction scores being reviewed, someone eventually pointing out that the top recurring request in their post-stay surveys was more local experiences. Mr. Covington appeared in October. No folder this time, no glossy projections. He sat at Tatum's kitchen table and drank the coffee she offered and said that Ridgeline Peak was interested in a formal partnership, a genuine one. They wanted to list Hales Hollow as an affiliated experience. They wanted to offer her tours as a resort package add-on. They were prepared to handle the booking platform, the marketing integration, the liability paperwork. Tatum listened to all of it. "And the irrigation infrastructure?" she asked. He said they were prepared to restore it, in writing. "And the sediment runoff from the construction site?" He said they were prepared to install retention features, also in writing. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the last of the season's lavender was standing in the cold October light, past its bloom but still gray-green and holding its shape against the wind. "I'll want Mr. Delacroix to look at any agreement before I sign it," she said. "Of course," said Mr. Covington. "Here's what I want you to understand about what Tatum had built. And I don't just mean the tour operation or the partnership or even the business, though all of that was real and growing, and eventually profitable enough that she hired 2 part-time employees and built a proper retail shed next to the barn. What she'd built was something harder to quantify. She had built proof that what she had was worth something the resort couldn't manufacture. They had the gondola and the stone fireplaces and the restaurant with the word elevated in every review. She had 60-year-old soil and copper distillery equipment and rows of lavender that her grandfather had planted and her father had tended, and she had nearly lost and had refused to lose. And it turned out that what people who rode gondolas and ate elevated food were actually hungry for, underneath all of it, was exactly that. Something that had been somewhere for a long time. Something that knew what it was. The partnership agreement was signed in November. The resort bundled Hales Hollow tours into 3 of their seasonal packages. Tatum got a percentage of every package sold that included her farm. She got the irrigation restoration. She got the retention berms on the hillside. She got, in small but legally binding print, a commitment that Summit Meridian's access routes would remain east of the county survey line. She did not sell her land. That spring, her father was well enough to walk the south field with her for the first time in 4 years. He moved slowly, and he needed his cane, but he walked the whole row to the end and back, and he touched one of the lavender plants the way he always had, just the tips of his fingers on the top of the bloom, like he was checking a pulse. "How many tours did you say?" he asked. 312 last season, Tatum said. "Give or take." He was quiet for a moment. A hawk turned slow circles above the ridgeline. Below them, the first pale sprouts of the new season were pushing up through the dark soil. "Your grandfather would have thought that was crazy," he said. "I know. He'd have been real proud, too." He kept walking, both of those things at once. Tatum didn't answer. She just kept pace beside him, row by row, the way she always had, moving through her own land, in her own time, going nowhere but forward. Not everyone needs a ski resort, but give people something real. Something that took decades and cold mornings and stubborn refusal to become what it is. and they will find their way to it, even if they have to walk downhill to get there.